Jesus asked, "When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" Faith is grounded in a relationship of trust that we call prayer. Even the Son of God prayed at his baptism, before he chose the apostles, at the transfiguration, at the feeding of the 5,000, the raising of Lazarus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, and on the cross. Prayer was obviously important in Jesus' life, but what about in our life? Sadly, Venerable Archbishop Fulton Sheen said, "Many look on prayer in the same fashion as a pilot may look at a parachute. He hopes he will never have to use it, but it may come in handy in case he has to bail out." We are created with a desire for prayer. Therefore, it is helpful to review what prayer is and how we can do it better. It is hard to define prayer, as it is as unique as our fingerprints are. St. John Damascene famously defined prayer as the raising of the mind and heart to God. This reminds us that prayer only happens when we put ourselves in God's presence. For St. Paul said, "In God we live and move and have our being." Since prayer is actually God's initiative before it is ours, one might say prayer is our response to God's touch in our lives. We can only get to God because God first sought us. Jesus said, "It was not you who chose me, but I who chose you." We will never advance in prayer if we are not first listening. St. Benedict taught his monks that the first key to the spiritual life is to listen. Even the Jewish Shema prayer began, "Hear, O Israel." Lastly, St. Therese of Lisieux defined prayer as a surge of the heart. It is a simple look turned towards heaven. It is a cry of recognition and of love, embracing both trial and joy. She was describing an openness in prayer to God, allowing Him to look at us and to love us. It's also an openness to God's possibilities and plans. The basis of good prayer is relational. Therefore, the way that we act with people is the way that we will act with God. Poor relational skills with others will affect our prayer with God negatively. For example, if we like to dominate conversations, we will tend to do all the talking in prayer. If we cannot express feelings of anger, jealousy, inadequacy, etc., we will probably not talk to God about such feelings. If we find it hard to give and to receive forgiveness, we will find it hard to accept God's mercy and to forgive God when life doesn't turn out the way that we hoped. If we are manipulative and controlling in our human relationships, we may bring that same attitude into our relationship with God. If we have little ability to put aside our own concerns and preoccupations, how will we hear and accept God's plan? If we have a hard time trusting others, we may not be able to trust God. These are all things to be aware of because they are hurdles, but God can break through any apparent barrier if we ask Him. Another area of growth is developing a positive image of God and of ourself. Subconsciously, we all carry some primitive and hostile views of God. We may believe in a loving and merciful God, but often our harsh and judgmental attitudes towards our own shortcomings come out in times of stress, doubt, mourning, and spiritual desolation. Then we fall back to destructive images of God, who we believe is scolding us or will only love us conditionally based on our merit and behavior. St. John said, "God is love." He is like a parent who loves their child no matter what. Sure, God has expectations of us because He can see the potential in us, but He is not capable of looking at us in the harsh manner that we view ourselves. Think of John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. The bystanders looked at her with condemnation. Jesus looked at her with loving eyes and invited her to live up to her full potential when He said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin any more." In conclusion, the motive of all prayer should be love. St. Augustine said, "Give me a man who is loved, and I will tell him what God is." In other words, whatever lovers say to one another, say that to God. The Old Testament book Song of Songs is about erotic love poetry of God's pursuit of us. Therefore, in prayer, we can rest in His love when we read, I am yours and you are mine.